Trouble River by Betsy Byers, Chapter 8, Wolves. At dusk, they stopped in the shelter of an old dry creek bed. There was a widened sandy place where a pool had once formed, and Dewey set his grandma's rocker on it, and then spread his blanket on the rise above it. They ate what was left of the cornmeal cakes, some fresh berries that Dewey gathered from nearby bushes, and drank water sweetened with molasses. Dewey washed 2 of the potatoes in the river and offered one to her, and she shook her head. "My teeth can't chew no raw potato," she said. Kneeling, Dewey ate one and washed it down with water. With the flat taste of the potato in his mouth, he suddenly remembered the geese in the sky, and he wished for a goose roasting over the fire, the way his pa had fixed them last spring. Roast goose would be good, he said, unable to keep the painful thought to himself. And so would a good bed, but we ain't got neither. She had been thinking of the fig tree that grew in her yard when she was a girl, and she had been wishing that she could have had some of those just then. "Try to get some sleep," she said abruptly. "I don't think I can." "Well, stretch out there on the blanket." "Yes'm." He had been sitting on the edge of the blanket, drawing a stick in the pale sand, and now he turned. Charlie was curled up in the center of the blanket, so Dewey lay beside him. He was so tired that his body ached, but he could not sleep. He lay with his hands locked behind his head. He wanted to build a fire, a small one of twigs and the litter of dry leaves, and he wanted to sit during the night feeding the fire. There would be no comfort in this small task, but he dared not. There would be comfort in this small task, but he dared not risk the smoke that would mark their presence. After a moment he said, "I think the Dargans are dead." It was not what he meant to say at all, and he wished he could take back the words. His grandma tried to set her chair in motion, but it would not rock in the soft sand. Then she stopped and said, "Shh, boy, try not to think about it. I can't help it." She sighed. "I know. I was sitting here thinking of it too." "How come the Indians killed them?" She shook her head. "Indians," she said. "I don't know, boy. Sometimes something gets into them, some hurt, some fear, and they just strike out." "But why the Dargans?" "I don't reckon it was anything the Dargans did, if that's what you're thinking, but there wasn't a kinder man anywhere than Mr. Dargan. Them days that your pa had the fever, why, we wouldn't have kept it going if it weren't for him." Her eyes rolled up to the darkening sky. "More than likely, them hunters from the north that killed that squaw last spring was what started it. But that was an accident." "Well, it wouldn't be the first accident that started trouble. I ain't saying for sure, but that's what it was. I'm just saying it could be." She sighed. "Don't nobody understand really. Now try to get some sleep." "Yes'm." He reached off the blanket, picked up a clod of earth, and broke it in his hand. He had seen his father kneel and do this many times in a plowed field, and he suddenly realized it was not food he wanted at all, not even a roast goose. It was his father. Abruptly, he wiped his hands on his breeches. "Push that dog off the blankets," his grandma said. "I swear that worthless thing will be up on my chair next." "He's all right, Grandma." He hugged the dog to him. He had a lonely feeling that he, Grandma, and Charlie were the only living creatures left in this world, and he buried his face in the dog's fur and waited until tears in his eyes had dried. Grandma, he said after a while, "what is it now? I thought you was asleep." "I was just wondering, Grandma, what's going to happen to us? I mean, if our cabin's burned." The thought had been troubling him all afternoon. The urgency of saving their lives had made the cabin scene unimportant at first. Now, suddenly, it was the most important thing in the world. "Well, I don't reckon it'll be the first time a person had to build again. But if you get the chance to build again," she said slowly, and he knew she was thinking of the Dargans. "Well, you thank the Lord and you do it." "Yes'm. There was once a man back home who got burned out twice. The last time he was scalped and left for dead. It was a pitiful thing." "What did he do?" "He built again. He built right on the same spot where the first cabin had been, twice, and he lived on that spot till he was 91 years of age." He was silent for a moment. "What did he do about his head, though, Grandma?" "He wore a handkerchief over it, and as far as I know, forgot about it," she said sharply, as if she were disappointed by the question. She paused, and Dewey thought that was all. But then she said, "There's something inside a person. I don't know how to give it a name exactly, but when something bad happens to you, like your Uncle Buck breaking both his legs, or your ma having 2 little babies in a row that never drew a breath, well, a person thinks this here's the end. And I've thought about it. I've thought about it like when I had to come live out here on the prairie. I crawled up in that wagon and I said to myself, this here's the end. I reckon you'll think about that more than once in your life. Only then a little time passes, a week or maybe more, maybe like a year, and then something inside a person, whatever you call it, makes you come alive again." I wonder if I'd be like that man, Dewey said. I don't know if I could rebuild a cabin twice. You could if there was anything to you at all, she said, suddenly brusque. Now get some sleep. You can't be steering us into Hunter City tomorrow if you don't get some sleep. I'll try. He shifted restlessly. He wanted to ask her how you knew if there was anything to you at all, how you knew before something bad happened. Maybe he thought I would be just like the man in Dead Man's Creek who just gave up and died because his wagon and horse were gone. Grandma, go to sleep. He lay down on his back for a long time, looking up at the sky. When sleep finally came, it was troubled. Hordes of Indians rode in his dreams, chasing the raft, and the raft moved with agonizing slowness on the water. The Indians were gaining on them, moving closer and closer, and the raft would not move. He rowed so hard the water rose behind him as if he were on a paddle wheel, and the raft would not go forward. The Indians were coming closer. He awoke, wet with sweat, in the chilly air, and then he realized it was not the dream that had awakened him. Charlie had risen on the blanket and was looking into the darkness, a low, menacing growl deep in his throat. His teeth showed white beneath his raised upper lip. The Indians, Dewey thought. Without a sound, he reached for the gun he had brought with him. For a moment, he could not find it, and then his hand curled round the wooden butt of the gun, and he raised it against his chest. Silently, he sat up and put it to his shoulder in one motion. Then he turned and glanced up. He saw nothing but the bushes, dark and jagged above him. This had seemed the ideal spot to camp when he had first seen it. It was sheltered and protected, but now Dewey realized it would be easy for an enemy to slip up on them under the cover of the brush. Dewey waited. He could see nothing. And then from the bushes he heard the snarl and the rising, sinister howl of a wolf. He clutched the gun and said in a low voice, "Grandma, wake up." What? She said. She awakened so abruptly that her cane jabbed deep into the soft sand. "Grandma, I think there's wolves up there." "Wolves," she said. She was fully awake now, for she feared them perhaps more than Indians. As a child, her fear of wolves had begun with her first fairy tale, and now she gasped, "They'll eat us alive." Her voice was helpless and old, and her hands clutched the arms of the rocker so tightly that the veins stood out like vines on the pale sand. "Hush, Grandma, I got the gun. We'll shoot them," she gasped. He watched, the gun to his shoulder, and suddenly through the darkness he saw the first wolf. It darted through the bushes, paused, snarling above them. Its slavering jaws were pulled back to reveal its fangs, and his grandma said again, "Shoot!" Charlie growled and stepped forward, forgetting his wounded leg, and stumbled on the blanket. At once the wolf came closer. It lunged as if to leap upon them, then withdrew, lunged again, testing the strength of his prey. Behind, eyes catching the gleam of the moonlight, other wolves moved back and forth, waiting to attack with their leader. From time to time they howled and showed their dark faces through the brush. Dewey pointed the gun at the first wolf. "Shoot," his grandma said again. So firm was her command that he almost pulled the trigger in spite of himself. In the ragged shadows, the wolf, snarling and threatening, advanced to the brim of the creek bed. He paused, and then, with a frenzied growl, crouched to jump. Dewey fired. The butt of the gun rammed his shoulder, and he fell backward with the force of the recoil. The wolf turned and disappeared, and Dewey heard the rustle of its body as it stumbled in the dry brush, rose, and ran again. There was a confused mingling of yelps, snarls, and the cry of the wounded wolf. Dewey said quickly, "Let's go." He took his grandma by the arm, with the other hoisted the unwieldy rocker. "Charlie," he said firmly, "come." The dog wanted to give chase. He moved toward the bank and looked up to where the wolves were still confused over their wounded leader. "Charlie!" Reluctantly, Charlie followed the boy as he stumbled toward the raft under his load. "Help me, boy," his grandma gasped. She clutched his arm and her cane in the same hand, and the cane pressed painfully into his flesh. From the other hand she held the velour satchel, and it swung like a wild thing. "Help me! I am, Grandma, I am!" He threw the chair onto the raft, and before she was seated began to push the raft away from the shore with his oar. "I ain't set yet," she said. Then, "But go on, boy, go on." On the shore a wolf howled, a high, lonely sound, and then the other wolves took up the chorus, and they ran in a pack to the bank and started for the raft, reaching out over the water with open jaws. Charlie barked sharply. He stood on the edge of the raft, crouched as if he were about to jump into the water and swim for the hateful beasts now taunting him with their howls on the shore. One wolf waded into the water, and Dewey drove it back with his oar. Quickly he brought the raft into deep water. Oh, his grandma said with a sigh. She rose slightly and shifted her chair to the center of the raft. Oh, she touched her cheeks with her hands, as if to cool the fevered fright that burned there. Don't stop no more, boy, she said finally. Whatever happens, don't stop no more. Them awful wolves. Wolves ain't so bad, Grandma. Pa says they're cowards. Not in a pack they ain't, she said. I'd rather come on a bear than a pack of wolves. Not me. She brushed her skirt. Oh, you can charm a bear by humming to him if you know how, she said. Once when I was a girl, I was out picking berries and I came upon a bear, a big bear. It was as black as night. Well, I remembered how my uncle told me about charming bears and I started singing. I was never so scared in my life, and I sang and I sang. One blow of that bear's paw and I wouldn't be sitting here today. Well, I can tell you I sang. And what happened? Well, that bear never moved, never took one step toward me. And after a bit, still singing my head off, I picked up my bucket real slow, and I walked backwards all the way down the hill. And the last I seen of that bear, he was standing there looking after me, listening to me singing. What did you sing, Grandma? What did I sing? I sang every song I knew of. Pig in the Parlor, Hush the Baby, and when I ran out of songs, I just made some up. She turned and looked over her shoulder. But wolves, you try singing to a wolf and see what it gets you. I reckon it wouldn't do much good. That's why I say I don't want to stop no more till we're inside Hunter City. I can keep going if you want, Grandma. I reckon. How much further is it? I don't know. The Dargins' place was about halfway, wasn't it? By land, I don't know how far it is by river. I don't even know that nobody's gone to Hunter City by river. Treble River rounds through the prairie like an animal on the scent of its prey. It hurried, then it slowed, it twisted, it straightened, it turned again, it hooked, and at last, after a long, twisted journey, it began to gain speed before it would rush headlong into Big River, mingling its brown water with the green of the larger river. Then, there, at the joining of the two rivers, would be Hunter City. Seems like we're picking up a little speed, don't it, boy? She said, and her voice was lighter. Maybe we'll be there by morning. Yes'm. Only don't you let us get there too fast, you hear me, boy? I can slow it down when I want to. He stuck his oar behind him in the water. They rounded a turn. This here's a crazy river. It's getting us there, boy, his grandma said. Dewey smiled. He dipped the paddle into the water and began to feel the glow of confidence. He felt that the worst of the journey was over. They had escaped the Indians and the wolves, and at any moment, surely by morning, they would be in Hunter City. He had no way of knowing about the stretch of treacherous water that lay ahead.